The wind howled through the woods as branches twisted and cracked in the night. The sound was akin to a pair of white-tailed deer clashing in the rut, their antlers entwined in combat. The bitter cold bit at the nape of my neck. The chill in the air forebode of an early winter, one that I wasn't entirely ready for. I pulled up the collar of my jacket and stared into the dark hollow. A shadow whipped across the field in the moonlight, causing my heart to thunder in my chest. My anxiety raced, leaving me nauseous. Bile rose in my throat. I nearly went to my knees as I failed to hold back the vomit, spewing dinner in the dirt and all over my boots. I cursed the memory of my dead wife, forever talking me into moving here as I wiped the retch from my chin. The young cow stirred anxiously beside me and let out a grumble. I tightened my grip on her lead rope and patted her side soothingly. "Easy, girl, easy." My nerves were ravaged by adrenaline. My free hand shook at my side uncontrollably, as if it existed independent from my body. I loathed Halloween. For the week leading up to the offering on the 31st of October each year, I hardly slept because the nightmares kept me awake. Fatigue made my eyelids feel as heavy as steel curtains, but fear wouldn't let me close them. My gaze still peered into the void of the forest at the edge of the property, searching for movement. Suddenly, a noise erupted over the trees, causing me to nearly jump out of my skin. It was a shriek, followed by a guttural growl, causing the wind to abruptly cease. The world descended into silence, and it was deafening. Terror crept up my spine and wrapped around my chest. My lungs constricted, and I wanted to scream, but I knew I couldn't. It might excite her. A cloaked figure floated into view, looking like an apparition of death itself. The witch hovered at the edge of my land and held out a gnarled, knobby hand, motioning to receive the offering. I pulled the cow forward despite her protests of hesitation. Not daring to meet the witch's eyes, my head hung low as I held out the lead rope. After a moment, I felt her take it from my hand. I was so afraid the edge of her robe would graze my skin that I recoiled quickly, hugging my arm to my body. Like in the Bible where the woman had been healed by touching Jesus' robe, I felt the opposite would happen if I touched the witch's, and blood would come pouring out of my body until I was emptied of it. Every nerve in my body was firing, begging me to flee as fast as I could, but I resisted and carefully turned around. I kept my steps slow and steady despite my legs quivering and my body trembling so fiercely that my teeth chattered. I didn't look over my shoulder until I reached the back door. Thankfully, the witch and her offering had disappeared into the trees. I let out a sigh of relief and opened the door, stepping into the kitchen. After locking the deadbolt, I leaned against it and sank to the floor. Tears came. I couldn't hold them back any longer. I wept and beat the heels of my fists on the ceramic tile until the last of the fear poured out of me and exhaustion filled the emptiness that it had left behind. Damn you, Samantha. You should be here. My cell phone buzzed loudly on the counter. I wiped my face and leapt to answer it. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice shaky and unsteady.
"Hi, Michael. It's Christine. I was just checking up on you. Are you okay?"
It was my neighbor who owned the farm next to me.
"Hey, Christine. I've been better, but I'm okay. It's done."
"I know, honey. I watched from my window. I'm glad you're all right."
She let out a sigh.
"Thank you. Did yours go okay?"
"Oh, yes. Joshua had to give the offering this year. After my knee replacement, I just don't get around that good. I hate that my son had to do it, but I'm not getting any younger. And with Ben being all but bedridden, well, you know."
"I know. It never gets easier. But at least it's done."
I rubbed the sting from my eyes, suddenly more burdened than ever from the lack of sleep.
"Yes, it is. Praise God. Listen, I'm making a huge breakfast in the morning. Bring your little one over if you'd like a home-cooked meal."
Thanks, Christine. That's awfully kind of you. But I think I'm just going to sleep for as long as Callan will let me, and then take it easy tomorrow. It's been a long day. The little guy fell asleep in his costume, surrounded by candy.
Oh, the sweet boy.
She chuckled.
Well, all right, honey, you do that and get some rest. Come over if you change your mind.
Thanks, I will. Have a good night.
You too, Michael.
Bye.
I pulled myself off the floor and slid my cell phone in the pocket of my jeans. A huge yawn poured out from my mouth as I kicked off my boots. I made a mental note to give them a good scrubbing in the morning and made my way to the stairs. The old farmhouse creaked and groaned as the wind picked up once more. It howled past, shaking the shutters on the windows. My feet got heavier with each step. I was certain I'd never felt so tired before in my life, and if I ever had, I didn't remember it. I peeked through the crack in my son's door before heading to bed. His mop of a head of chestnut hair spilled across his pillow. His superhero costume was littered with colorful candy wrappers. He slept soundly, totally unaware of the horrors that had taken place outside. A grin crept over my face as I closed his door the rest of the way. I stumbled into my bedroom and collapsed on the bed, not bothering to undress or even get under the blankets. I began to sob again just for a moment, but then succumbed to sleep before tears even hit the comforter. A loud noise from above yanked me violently from my dreams. I sat up in the bed, my head pounded as my vision swam. I looked over at the alarm clock, 3 a.m. I'd only been asleep for a few hours. I rubbed the blur from my eyes and listened intently for the source of the noise. Footsteps. Footsteps above me. On the roof? No, surely not. But there they were. Footsteps. I slid off the bed as quietly as possible, not daring to make a sound. The footsteps continued above as I tiptoed to the gun cabinet. I pulled the keys from my pocket, but my grip was loose on the key ring, and as the weight of them caught the air, they slipped from my grasp. I bent low to catch them, but completely missed it. The keys clattered loudly on the floor. The footsteps abruptly stopped at the sound, and everything went still. Shit! I bit my lower lip, scolding myself silently. I took a deep breath and slowly squatted down to pick them up, and then unlocked the cabinet as gracefully as possible. The hinges creaked, causing me to cringe as I grabbed the 12 gauge and held it tightly against my stomach. I held my breath and stared at the ceiling, listening. 1, 2 footsteps right above me. Steadying my trembling hands, I racked a shell into the chamber. Silence again. I shifted my weight to my right foot, shouldered the bump stock, and aimed it high. After a moment, there was a scratching on the tin roof like nails on a chalkboard. It sent a shiver all through me, causing the hairs on my neck to stand up. Go away. Go away. Go away! I screamed in my mind, but didn't dare lower the shotgun. Suddenly, there was a sound of metal being peeled back like a can opener. The wood framing shook in the soffit from the impact. Oh my God, she's coming through the roof! Go away! I shrieked at the top of my lungs, and for a second, the destruction stopped. I tried not to piss myself as I kept the barrel trained on the ceiling. Then there was a loud crash as a scaly white hand burst through the popcorned plaster and drywall. I shot just to the left of her forearm, causing her to squeal like a wounded boar. She withdrew the hand. 1, 2, 3 footsteps. I slid the pump, racking another shell. The spent casing rolled under the bed as I moved to the other side of the room. The twisted claw of a hand burst back through a few feet to the right. The witch yanked her arm back through the hole and screeched angrily like a Valkyrie. Black blood as thick as maple syrup trickled through the debris. My breathing was ragged as hot tears flowed down my cheeks. The footsteps retreated to the other side of the house. I could hear the sound of tin being torn back above another room. Callan! I scrambled down the hallway and flung open his door. Daddy? Callan sat up in his bed, looking from me, then to the sounds in the ceiling.
Come to me, son!
I yelled, holding out my hand. He ran to me and hugged my torso tightly. The sound of lumber splintering filled the room.
What's happening, Daddy?
His voice cracked with fear. Then silence fell over us once again. Shh, I whispered, aiming the barrel overhead. Callan whimpered, burying his face into my shirt. 1, 2, 3 footsteps. Then a tap, tap, tap from the roof, followed by a deafening explosion as a huge portion of the ceiling imploded inward into the bedroom. I shielded us from the debris and then looked out into the night sky. The witch stood at the edge of the opening, the hood of her cloak resting down on her shoulders. Her face was wrinkled on one side like the knot of an old oak tree, while the other was peppered with buckshot. Loose meat hung from her cheek. Her ink-stained lips were twisted into an angry snarl, her eyes black and void of expression. My fear gave way to righteous anger. "No!" I screamed, pulling the trigger and sending a cluster of lead right into her chest. The witch was lifted off her feet and sent over the side of the house to the yard below. I grabbed my son's hand and ran down the stairs and out the front door. I bounded across the lawn as fast as I could without causing Callan to fall behind. Without even thinking, I made my way towards the towering brick home of Ben and Christine. The lights were off, but I knew they were home, and I prayed to God they'd be able to help somehow. The door was unlocked, as it always was. I swung it wide open and then locked it shut after we were inside.
Christine! Ben!
I shouted as we entered the living room.
Wait here, buddy.
I sat him down on the sofa in the corner. He nodded with watery eyes as I caressed his cheek.
Christine! It's Michael!
There was no reply. I made my way to the stairs, calling after them once more. But as I ascended, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Something was off. Why weren't they answering? They had to have heard me. There was no way they hadn't. I reached the door to the master bedroom and saw that it had been ripped from the hinges and tossed in the hallway. Deep claw marks lined its frame. Oh, sweet Jesus. I wanted to turn back. I knew what would greet me inside the room, but I had to check. They could be injured and in need of help. But as I rounded the doorway, I knew there was no help to be had. It was far worse than I could have ever imagined. I stood at the threshold of hell. Ben and Christine weren't Ben and Christine anymore. They were meat and organs splayed and eviscerated across the mattress. A soup of flesh, muscle, and bone. I stumbled away from the room and dry heaved in the hallway. Saliva pooled on the hardwood floor from an empty stomach. But it was no time to fall apart. My son needed me. Survive now, therapy later, I told myself. Tightly gripping the shotgun, I scurried back down the steps and into the foyer. A loud shriek came from behind the house as I entered the living room. She's here. I checked the chamber and magazine tube. Only one shot left. Crouching low, I made my way to the rear window. The witch was hunched over, her hands shoved deep into the soil up to her elbows. She was chanting something in a language I didn't recognize. The house began to shake and the ground began to tremble. Floorboards creaked and groaned. A lamp fell over, shattering the glass that shrouded the bulb. I quickly scooped Callan up onto my side.
Daddy, it's an earthquake!
He cried as I bolted out the front door with him in tow. I stood back and watched in horror as the earth opened itself up and swallowed the old farmhouse. Within 10 seconds, the entire first floor was underground. Windows shattered from the pressure as fissures cracked along the brick siding. Another 8 seconds, and the rose bushes out front were touching the gutters. 3 more, and I was watching the top of the chimney slide into the chasm below. The soil flattened itself over the place where the home sat only moments before. My mouth fell open in fearful awe. They were gone. Everything. Gone. A memory of sweet Christine baking banana bread while we played cards at her kitchen table flashed through my mind. A lump swelled in my throat, threatening to choke me. I wanted to break down and weep, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Not until we were safe. The witch was standing now. Her black hood was up again, covering her face, but I could see her blackened teeth twisted in a smile from within.
Run, Callan! You run back to the house and you hide. Do you hear me?
I went to one knee, gripping him tightly by the shoulders and forcing him to look into my eyes. He was sobbing now, but shook his head to let me know he understood. I squeezed him into a hug, knowing it might be the last time, and then pushed him forward. He took off running as fast as his little legs could take him. The witch turned to look his way as he went.
Your fight is with me!
I hollered, trying to sound brave even as my voice cracked. I dropped the 12 gauge, knowing it wouldn't do any good, and walked towards her. She turned her attention back to me as I closed the distance between us. The closer I got, the more my body shook as I betrayed my senses to flee. My false bravado had all but dissolved. I stopped within 10 feet of her and bit my lip to stop it from quivering. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees in her presence.
Why have you done this? We gave you what you wanted. You got what was agreed upon.
The offering lacked 2 spirits.
Her voice was as if 2 people spoke in unison, the high pitch of an old woman and then a deeper voice of something ancient.
What do you mean? The offering was the same as every year.
No, the room was empty.
More of the black syrup dripped from her lips and down her chin. My mind reeled. How could this happen? The cow was placed with the bull for weeks of breeding.
Impossible,
I whispered.
The bull is seen as too weak, too old.
Ben had mentioned getting a new bull next spring for that very reason. Didn't know how many more calves he could sire, but he had assured me we were fine for this year. I guess he was wrong. Too little, too late now.
What must be done to make it right? Tell me what to do and I'll do it. Just don't hurt my son.
I went to my knees and pleaded with the witch, tears rolling freely down my face. She gave me that sick grin once more, her gums blistered and rotting. She came to stand next to me and bent low to whisper in my ear. As she spoke, my eyes grew wide. My mouth went dry at the evil in her words. Her proposition was an abomination, something I could never do. But I had to, for Callan. It was October 31st. Large flakes of snow fell gently over the asphalt. It didn't stick, of course. It was too early for winter yet, and the ground was still too warm. But I couldn't believe how it had gotten cold so early these past 2 years. I sat outside of Mel's Diner, idling in a rusty Toyota I'd bought off an old man for $800, way over on the other side of Indiana. I had removed the tags and scratched out the VIN number this morning after leaving Callan with my parents in Kokomo. Had to be sure when she went missing, they couldn't trace her back to me. It wouldn't do me any good to get arrested. Who would appease the witch then? Who would raise my son? I checked over the duffel bag in the passenger seat one more time. Duct tape, rope, zip ties, and a hammer. I watched her from the window, closing the register and turning off the kitchen lights. She took off her apron and hung it, revealing a large baby bump. It was her first. The witch upped the ante for our deal. The offering was much greater now. This is nothing I'd ever wanted, but what could I do? I had to think of my son. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out some more of my episodes here.